Truth is the enemy of happiness. Isn't that the decision we all made?
Oh, but you know the truth, don't you? There's not a thing I can tell you that you don't already know. Is there?
Have you had your joy, Ollie?
People in town are getting a tad bit skinny. I think they're starving to death. And they're painting the streets in fucking rainbows. Have you not noticed?
Oh, Ollie.
Why are you all wearing those ridiculous new masks?
You should get one. They shape your face into a smile. And when you smile, you can't help being happy.
We have to tell people. They need to know the truth.
No!
Hello ratbags, welcome to the Access Show. As you can gather from that start, we are taking a look at We Happy Few. No other game in recent memory has undergone such transformations and maybe had such a rocky road in terms of criticism levelled its way during early access. We Happy Few started off as a Kickstarter backed survival game that was going to have elements of story added to it. Inspired by Bioshock, fidelity and the gameplay and the sort of exploring that you would do in them types of games, the devs really wanted to craft something quite unique. When they released the trailer a good few years ago now, people got really excited by the prospect of this dystopian future based on taking this medicine, this drug, this joy that enhanced and changed people's lives and made them forget about all the bad things that had been happening. It transformed. It started off as quite a very generic survival game. When it launched in early access on PC, it got a huge amount of attention, but that attention quickly dissolved. So what's happened with We Happy Few? I'm going to take you through everything we know now, what to expect when it comes out on August the 10th, and its history leading up to it. It's actually 3 years ago now that they announced it coming out. Backed by Kickstarter, then through early access, it was a wild and vibrant, colourful world. I'd never seen anything like this. It was spooky, it was freaky, in fact it was a bit unnerving, and that's what made people really excited about this. We hadn't seen any of the gameplay elements, the trailer was enough to get us hooked into it. That's what we wanted to be in this world, taking a look at this amazing Technicolor creation. When it boiled down to it, some of the survival aspects that started to be fed through were just a little bit similar to what we'd always experienced in other games. Eat food, get buffs, go through the game. There wasn't much to it in terms of the pure gameplay mechanics that was different from some other games. Now the world was a good aspect, but again we had no story because the devs had said the story was going to be coming much towards the end of the game and they didn't want to spoil it, which was fair enough. So what we did get was this sandbox environment that started you off in the poorer districts of Wellington Wells. And the objective of the game was to escape Wellington Wells. It also launched on the early access program, the game preview program for Xbox. This was really something quite unique. Not that many games had launched yet. We only had a handful, and it was something quite unusual to be launching so soon after the Steam release. The general consensus was that when We Happy Few launched with its trailers and announcements, people were more interested in the story aspect than they were in the survival aspect. The developers took heart from this and decided they would try and focus more on it. And this is where it gets a little bit messy and conflicting depending on who you believe and what you think. In one camp you have players that were playing the game, wanted to see the survival aspects worked out a little bit more and weren't as fussed about the story elements. In their mind, the story elements weren't the best thing, it was just simply having this amazing world to go and explore and to have this survival element in it. The story elements would be a bonus. During their Kickstarter program, the devs did say they were looking to go bigger in scope if they could. However, they stressed that it was a survival game with story elements to it. The story mode centred around 3 protagonists all trying to escape Wellington Wells. Now, development of We Happy Few started to increase. We got more updates. They obviously got a big reception for it. And Compulsion Games, the people behind Contrast, a little indie game way back when, seemed to be the darlings of the indie game world. People really liked the first initial stages of the game when they were playing it in early access, and most people assumed that the survival element would be worked on massively before release. Now, this is where it gets a bit controversial. A year roughly after their first reveals and their first getting the early access build on Xbox and Steam, they announced a partnership with Gearbox. Gearbox were going to be their publisher, and they went from being an early access title to being a pre-order title. Now, why is that such a big deal? You can pre-order early access games, can't you? Well, the price jumped up massively. In fact, it doubled in price, along with the news that there was going to be a season pass for the game. Basically, the developers decided they had a lot of content and they were confident they could actually make this a AAA style experience that warranted the increase in price. Gearbox also announced a special collector's edition that didn't have a copy of the game in it, and lots of typical pre-order stuff that we're used to seeing nowadays. This was a big jump from what they'd spoken about in early access and their Kickstarter campaign. In fact, during their launch they'd spoken a lot about adding the story, but it would come at a later date. But now we were being told they needed the money from the publishers, they needed help to publish the game so that it could finish off story elements and to add it and expand on it. In fact, that was their wording, that the money helped them expand even greater than they originally planned. So going by what the devs say, you can't really argue with that. If they're going to be producing something even better, even bigger, even bolder, then why not increase the price a little bit? But many felt it was still a bit of an outrage increasing the price during early access. Alongside that came the revelation that there would be no more content updates during that time until release. The full release of the game would happen 6 to 9 months later. They had a release date, and during that time there would be no updates for the game while they stripped it back and went back to work on what really stood out from the initial E3 trailers and the announcements when it launched. This did upset a lot of people, including me. I done a little bit of a rant video about it, and I ended up getting into a bit of an argument with some of the developers of it on Twitter. In my mind, it stunk of a publisher putting its money-fingered hooks into a game. Regardless of whether or not We Happy Few needed the help, it just felt like Gearbox was probably the worst example of a publisher that you could probably find at the time. A season pass, pre-orders, no longer getting updates or content for the game, and of course doubling that price really stunk of corporate messing. In fact, it bugged me so much I decided not to do any more content. Up until that point, I'd been highlighting all the updates that the game was receiving. I was doing little let's plays on it, showing people what to expect from the updates, and I was seeing progress being made. They were updating it, the UIs were looking good, the world building was becoming along. But the Gearbox incident and just their forward plans made me really contemplate not covering it anymore. It came to near the release, well, a couple months beforehand it was meant to, and there was a delay. They announced a delay for the game, so it wouldn't be coming out when it was meant to. It'd been pushed back until summer. And that's where we are in 2018. The game was meant to come out, I do believe, in April or May. It's been pushed back till August the 10th, and that is when we're finally going to get our hands on We Happy Few. So how has it really changed in them few months? Well, big things have happened. Xbox, Microsoft now own the company. They have bought Compulsion Games. They're part of the Xbox Microsoft stable. This could be a good thing and a bad thing depending on who you ask. Personally, I think it's a good thing. I think that for this independent games company that had only really made Contrast before it and were obviously struggling with this game, it was a good idea to get someone experienced with the money, with the clout, and just the overall pedigree of Microsoft. Of course, in the future, it remains to be seen how much Microsoft will treat them good. Microsoft aren't the worst games publishers out there or development teams. They've definitely helped produce and helped a lot of games companies, and they're nowhere near the EA levels of shutting down good companies for fun. However, there is a little bit of stigma still with Microsoft in turning down or shutting down games that just don't necessarily fit what they think or want. But this was a good thing. This was definitely in need of some extra financing and some help. So, currently right now, We Happy Few is published by Gearbox, it's owned by Microsoft, and the development of the game has now shifted. It no longer will be an out and out survival experience. It's going to be a linear, story driven game. There will still be some cool different elements in the game, like procedurally generated levels. A big part of the appeal for We Happy Few was that when you started out, the biomes or the map, or originally the little town that you start in, it had a procedurally generated effect. There were certain quests, certain buildings that would always be there, but they'd be in different places, and it'd be a case of finding them beats and doing what you wanted to do along the way. The game had a little bit of a messy inventory system, But it had been improving. It had a substantial update called Life in Technicolor that gave a bunch of new fixes to it, and remembering it was still early access. I was still looking forward to playing it. I did say it was a bit generic when I first tried it, but the world looked great. The characters, the voice work looked amazing. It was definitely something unique and unusual I'd never seen. So the idea that that has now been taken away and it's been replaced by something a little bit more linear, I'm not too sure if I'm unhappy or happy with that. If it means we're not going to necessarily get too much of a generic, boring survival experience, like having to eat for the sake of eating, then I'm down for that actually. If it's got a good story to it, which it should have, looking at the world and what we've seen from the snippets of trailers, it really does bode well. The devs do have plans also to add a sandbox mode to it after development. They're still working on the actual, ins and outs of that, but I imagine it'll be something very similar to what we saw during the early access period. But for release, it's not going to be there. They haven't adjusted the price of the game though so far. It's still available for exactly the same price that they announced with their partnership with Gearbox. And in fact, if you've bought it, you can still go and play that version. In fact, it might even become a bit of a historical heirloom, and I may even just go and play all through it just to record it and have it there. But we're not going to be getting the sandbox mode after full launch of the game, and we're not quite sure what else is going to be in the game other than a brand new 20-hour crafted experience. So we won't be getting the sandbox mode. It's going to be a more linear experience. It's still going to have some of that procedurally generated effect in it. As you saw from the story trailer at the beginning, it looks very much more fleshed out, and if they've got lots of cutscenes, then that's all going to be good and dandy. I still am a bit worried though, it's just become a bit of a car crash. I wasn't the only one to get involved in spats with them. In fact, they had quite a few run-ins with critics, as well as their own fans who took to Steam and gave it quite some negative reviews. I do believe that some of their Kickstarters weren't too impressed either with the fact that it had increased in price massively and the scope of the game had changed quite significantly. All in all, lots of people felt like the development team hadn't really been as truthful as they could have been. But looking back on it now, maybe that's just how business is. You can't always relay everything that's going on behind the scenes because it can damage your brand and it can damage your chances of that game coming out. No doubt about it though, if they'd found Xbox and Microsoft to come to their rescue before Gearbox and maybe just been published wholly by Xbox and Microsoft, I do believe we might have had a better experience. Who knows, we won't find out until 10th of August. I'm still going to cover the game. I'm intrigued. It's always been a really interesting world for me to take a look at, and I definitely want to see what it has got since it hasn't got most of the survival elements. What they've done with the survival stuff is made it more of a buff and a debuff. So you can do things, you can go without eating, drinking, but it will make you slower, it will reduce your stamina, and it will just make your experience a little bit harder. Whereas if you do eat well, you get rest, it's going to give you a buff that makes you basically stronger and gets you ahead in the game maybe. That could also be interesting, and I'm willing to give it a try. But that is generally what I feel following the news over the last few years with Happy Few, and it's crazy to think that I've actually been following this since it launched. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what happens. I really do hope it hits its beat, and I really do hope it's worth the price increase, and let's hope that under Microsoft's bit of extra leadership and help, they may be able to come up with some really unique ideas again in the future that deliver on what they originally planned. They've definitely had some controversies. They've only just passed certification in Australia, which had banned the game from appearing because of the violence and the drug use. That has now been rescinded and you'll be able to buy it in Australia after all. One good thing is that even though it's being bought by Microsoft, it's still going to be published on the PS4, so you'll be able to get a chance to play it for the first time, as it's only been available on PC and Xbox One. So there we go. In closing, go and give We Happy Few a try as it stands. If you've still got it, maybe reinstall it on your Xbox or PC. Play in that mode that it is at the moment. It could be something as a bit of a time capsule, because the game as we know it has changed massively. Let me know what you feel about that in the comment section. Should developers be changing the game so drastically during the early access? Is there an argument that Kickstarters who funded the game initially should be getting what they funded rather than something that they've just responded to? Or is it a good idea that the devs responded to all the positive feedback from the trailers they launched with and announced, and they went with what was really most popular and what the feedback they kept getting from their forums? I'll definitely be covering it as it comes out next month. I'm Jade Plays Games. This has been an Access show, just taking you through a little bit about We Happy Few and Compulsion Games. If you disagree on anything, leave it in the comment section down below, and I'll see you ratbags very soon.
Wakey, wakey, everyone. And it's another fabulous day in Wellington Well. Do what you should be doing, and you never have to worry.
Sally?
Arthur, we're practically the only two people in this entire city not stoned out of our minds on joy.
It's not a lovely day for it. It's a fucking terrible day for it.
If you force people to have the emotions you want, then you've turned them into robots made out of meat.
Where is it? Where's the blackberry?
You've gone too far this time.
People won't face facts. Not until we take their joy. And when we do that, they'll murder each other in the street.